I'm Rick Randolph. I'm a retired U.S. Army officer. I've been working in and out of the developing world really for about over 20 years. It started out in the Army, had a number of deployments into the developing world. I was in Special Forces, and because of that, you actually go into countries and you work with the people in the countries. So I had experience there working in Senegal, working in Haiti. I was in Haiti for 6 months, and that really carried over into working later on with Project Peanut Butter, and also really with Heart to Heart. So I started working with Heart to Heart with the earthquake in Haiti in 2010. I've been working with them regularly since then. I've been the full-time Chief Medical Officer for the last 2 years. This has allowed me to really go in and take a look closely at the developing world, and you can see the effects of global climate change there and now. So why should we talk about climate change in the developing world? Well, the effects there are different. Even when you know a lot about what it's going to do around the rest of the country here, it has a different effect in the developing world. It's also the much greater vulnerability in the developing world to the effects of climate change. And last, but what Chad mentioned, is there's just a lot of them out there. So, majority world.
And they're us.
So you can get a little picture of the pie there. Developed countries have maybe 20% of the population. Developing world, about 80% of the population. You can see the relative contribution in there of the towards climate change in terms of greenhouse gases. Now, when you talk about developing world, it's pretty heterogeneous. You have countries like India and China that are part of the developing world. And then you have countries like Haiti, Malawi, places like this, which are the least developed countries. But even within countries that have a significant amount of development like India, there's a lot of heterogeneity there as well. One of the things that people don't realize is when you think of India, you think of all the high-tech stuff they have going on and all the billionaires they have there. But they have a higher rate of severe acute malnutrition in India than they do in sub-Saharan Africa. So just the income inequality there really contributes to the vulnerability of the majority of the population in India to the effects of climate change. One of the things about the poor is that they cluster in the most vulnerable areas. This is one from Bangladesh, and you can just see that they're right there on top of the water. So the areas that people will end up congregating in are the least valuable and the most vulnerable areas. So they will cluster down on the ocean side. You'll see them on hillsides. If you go into Haiti, there's just they live and farm in these areas that you wouldn't want to roll over in bed at night because you'll end up all the way at the bottom of the hill. And in the real marginal farmlands, the places that are most vulnerable, that have the least amount of water resources, so that the crops are more likely to fail in those areas. And when you're in these vulnerable areas, then bad things can happen. You can see the effects of big storms, any of the areas where you will, well, usually in the poorest countries, the poorest are affected. So in Haiti, I just returned from the western tip of the southern peninsula of Haiti. This had was hit directly by a Category 4 hurricane. Haiti has among the lowest amount of resilience, sort of a technical term, but the ability to withstand disasters of any of the countries around, and it was just absolutely devastating. As was the Philippines, somewhat less of a problem with resilience, but when Typhoon Haiyan hit there, it was just, again, just devastation because the areas were so vulnerable. And the vulnerability isn't always just geographic. A lot of times it's social. So this is the Lunga Lunga slums in Nairobi. And it wasn't really climate change, but there was a fire there. There was a gas line that had been running underneath there. Yeah, they had a fire and they lost someplace around 120 people just because of the crowded nature. So anytime the poor are clustered together, they're going to be more vulnerable to any sort of disaster, be it climate related or other. Getting more directly into the climate change, this is what's been happening in southern Africa. Earlier this summer I was in Malawi, and Malawi is right in this area. You see this long little sliver of a country right there. Yeah, thank you. And they've had bad harvests for the last, basically failed monsoons for the last 3 years. Really a big problem. We were in a place called Mbisi, and 85% of the people in that area are subsistence farmers. And during the hungry times, the average person lost 10% of their body weight. One of the things, in the hungry time, I should explain a little bit, because that's not something we run into here a lot, but right after a harvest has been brought in, usually people can get 3 meals a day. But that'll only last for a month or two. Then most of the year they'll be down to 2 meals a day, and that works okay. But the time before the harvest, usually around 4 months before the harvest, is when the stores of stored grain and stored food is the lowest. They'll be down to 1 meal a day. The most vulnerable population of that group is going to be the children, particularly the children under 5. They're dependent on parents and family to feed them, and anybody that's been around a 3, 4, or 5-year-old knows that they take their own good time about eating. You can't really hurry them on real well. And when you eat out of a common pot for a family, and you've got a bunch of other people that are hungry there, oftentimes the kids are the ones, the youngest ones, the kids 5 and under, are the ones who are least able to get even their share of the food out of the pot. Once they turn 5, they tend to be a little bit better at it. They can go, they also, above 5, they tend to form groups. They kind of wander around in the villages, and they can actually kind of, go from house to house and feed themselves. Before then, they can't. And so you end up with a really high rate of severe acute malnutrition, severe chronic malnutrition in the kids that are 5 and under. This was from Malawi, and it's just dry there, dry and dusty, and just hard to be able to get the crops in of any substantial good effect. Climate change. Now you can see right here, these are, This shows you what the effect of climate change, particularly in the developing world. The redder the area, then the greater the decline in agricultural productivity. And you can see areas up there that are the deepest red are going to be those areas that are going to be hit the hardest. So this is a combined effect of altered rainfall patterns, change in the growing season, which is actually a significant problem, additional pests that are available, and this really causes problems with the malnutrition. It can result in the food shortages. This is from Haiti. It's a little more of an acute loss of food. This is from the Hurricane Matthew that hit just a few months ago. And Hurricane Matthew hit the west end of the southern peninsula so hard, particularly in the provinces of Sud and Grand Anse, that there is no, they basically wiped out the entire agricultural sector. 80% of the farm animals died. 100% of the crops were destroyed. 80% of the fruit trees were destroyed. They are going to be totally dependent on imported food for the next 6 months or so until they can get the next harvest in. What that results in are things like this. These are food trucks going out for distribution, but they can only go out when there's an armed escort, because people, well, when you're working low down on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you will do stuff to make sure you get enough food for you and your family. And so the food convoys were waylaid on the roads, and they could not really pass without an armed escort. And you'd end up in food riots. When I was seeing patients in the village of Montfranc, where we were running a cholera treatment unit, somebody made the mistake of trying to distribute tickets that they could redeem at the next feeding center for food, but they were doing it without security. And we were working out of a police station. We had to go and close and lock the gates on the police station. These barred gates in the front, and just to be able to keep people from pouring in there while this was going on. So it's just, again, you have desperate times, you have desperate people. This right here is in the aftermath of that. They finally got security in, and they're starting to do food distribution. So you can see people carrying bags of rice on their heads. You can see in another area down by the river, it was again another food distribution. But this was occurring almost a month after the hurricane. So these people, these were initial distributions. So this is a real problem. One other thing about this is that there was actually some food available. The markets actually had food, and the prices weren't all that high, at least historically. The problem is that none of the people who needed the food had the money to be able to buy it. There were 3 major famines that were studied, that have been studied at length. There was the potato blight famine in Ireland in the 1840s, Ethiopian famines in the 1970s and 80s, and the Punjab famine in India in 1943. In all of those, there was actually enough food available to feed everybody. But you ended up with situations where millions died. It was because of distribution of food within that area. A lot of it was due to, in some cases, problems in transportation and hoarding, as in the Punjab. Some cases of maybe it was just really bad intent, as in Ireland, or maybe just incompetence. And there certainly was bad intent in the Ethiopian famines. But there was enough food, and we're running into maybe something along that line, because there is food available in the markets. The other thing that climate change does is it moves people around. In Syria, there was a drought that was the worst in at least 900 years. It caused the emptying of the farms into the cities. 80% of the cattle died in Syria by 2009. This is before the Arab Spring began. 1.4 million people were displaced off their farms and into the cities. And what this did was this disrupted the social networks. This removed a lot of the constraints on behavior and basically allowed people to be recruited into more extreme organizations. So this is one of the unintended consequences, or not it's one of the less recognized consequences of climate change, is the generation of climate refugees, and what that can do to the social fabric of a country and what that can cause internationally. There was a study out in the National Institutes of Science and magazine Proceedings, and they attribute 40% of the cause of the Syrian civil war to climate change-induced drought that occurred there. And so you're talking now up into the millions of people that have died, and 40% cause of that was climate change. And it's not just in Syria. Certainly climate change exacerbates problems all over, particularly in the developing world. Mali has well-documented conflicts between the pastoralists and the farmers when they try and raise the agricultural areas change due to rainfall patterns. The nomadic people have to go chase vegetation for their cattle, and there's a big conflict there. So it's a common problem just in the change of the agricultural areas, just basically chasing the water. Thank you, Dr. King. I think you will recognize this slide. And this is the watershed from the Tibetan highlands. You can see on here all the different rivers that are flowing out of the Tibetan plateau, and they flow into these developed countries, or developing countries. And climate change is, they've got a lot of problems with dams that in Tibet, China, for whatever reason, really likes to build dams. So they're going to have problems with water supply downstream anyhow. But climate change is estimated to reduce the water flow again by about another 20%. Now you look at the map, you'll see 3 nuclear-capable countries right there. And if China would cut off water flow, or severely reduce water flow from the Tibetan plateau into India, into Pakistan, or down into any of the areas, then you have a greatly increased possibility of conflict. And any conflict is going to, of course, hurt the poor more than anybody else. And this is not an isolated opinion within the military. I had a chance to talk to Rear Admiral Mullins, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff a number of years ago. And he was assessing external threats to the United States. And I asked him specifically about global climate change, because it wasn't listed on his thing that he was going through. He said, well, I'm just addressing things that as they currently are. He says, in 20 years, climate change will be definitely one of the top 5 threats to the United States. For all the changes that will generate, will be threats.
How long ago?
This was, I don't know, a year and a half ago, I think, when we attended his talk. So yeah, that is counting down now. And one of the other features of climate change, particularly in the developing world, is its major storms that it generates. So this is from Hurricane Matthew, the recent one in Haiti. This is the main hospital in Jeremy. Jeremy is a city of, 70, 80,000 people. So this is their hospital. You can see the roof was taken off, the second floor was taken out. And that certainly has to do with building standards, but it also had to do with the strength of the storm that was there. This is the clinic on the building, on the grounds of the cholera treatment unit that we were running in Mafram. So even the little buildings, you can just see all the roof was removed, all the supplies were ruined. We're in the process right now of rebuilding that to be able to operate in that area. We were able to repair parts of the cholera treatment unit. This is going to be a regular fixed clinic that we'll be running there as soon as renovations are completed. We're right now running, well, out of tents right now because we got kicked out of the police station. Yeah, there's politics. So that's what we saw in Haiti. This is Typhoon Haiyan. Again, the people are clustered right by the water, and the poorest people are clustered the closest. You hear all these, when you're there, you hear heartbreaking stories from people. They'll go, yeah, I lost my son because they live close to the water, and he was afraid to leave his lodging because he needed to protect what they had. There was no way to secure what he had, and so he had to stay there for it. And then in Tacloban, there was it was almost like a tidal wave that came in, the tsunami-like. It was about 12 foot high, and it was kind of a recoil mechanism off of the, caused by the wind that pushed the water out of Tacloban Bay, and then when the eye passed, it just shoved the water in there. So it was a wall of water that just hit the thing. And just, you ended up with, I think it was around 8,000 people died due to this one. And over 1 million people were displaced. So this is actually a relatively spared area. This is Ormoc City. This is on the backside of Leyte from where the typhoon hit. This is further down the coast, got hit a little bit harder. You'll see that, actually you won't see the leaves on the trees. All the leaves on the trees were just blown off. The trees were either blown down or decapitated. And the more direct effects, this is actually a picture from where we were running clinic one day, and this area right here is a mass grave. There were supposedly around 15 people buried there. And this was actually a homemade litter to carry the bodies in. So those are the things that when people are in vulnerable areas and you have disasters, that's what you're going to run into, and that's the risk. But it's not just from single major events like storms, rain events. This is Pakistan back from 2010, and you can see the amount of flooding that was done there. So this is a huge area of Pakistan. You can just see the size of Pakistan right here, and you can just see the involvement. And it was, it displaced 20 million people. 20 million people. That's just shocking. That's a lot of people, and we wouldn't be able to handle that well here. Certainly, they didn't handle it well in Pakistan. And other areas. These are the Marshall Islands. You can see kind of how close that people are living there to the water. The majority of the land in the Marshall Islands, which is in the Pacific, it's a protectorate of the United States, is less than 6 feet above sea level. Climate change is going to raise the water levels, depending on the estimates you like, a foot by 2100. Some scenarios say more, 2 or 3 feet. It doesn't take much more than a foot or so of raise in the sea level to spoil water supplies in these areas, or to just make the risk of the storm that much greater when the storms that do come, that will come, do come, and they will just have that much more effect on people. One of the other things that will happen there is you're going to end up with a lot of climate refugees. Due to our treaties with the Marshall Islands, part of the Protectorate Treaty, is that we guarantee their ability to come to the United States. So what we've guaranteed right there is about entrance of about 70,000 people into the United States as climate refugees. People don't really think about that a lot, but that's still a fair number of people to settle. We're having a hard time, coping with a few thousand Syrians coming in. And we'll have 70,000 people coming in from the Marshall Islands, plus who knows how many more from wherever else.
Do they have the right to come without climate change? Is there free exchange,
Yeah.
like people from Puerto Rico, they can come anytime they want regardless of climate change, or they can delay climate?
Yeah, their status is they have to, if they come in, they don't have to be climate refugees to come in, but they have to apply. They're not U.S. citizens, but they have the right to immigrate and become U.S. citizens. So, that 70,000's, a bunch of people, but it's not like someplace like Bangladesh. So when you look at Bangladesh, it is so marginal in terms of a lot of the land there. You can see what will happen right now with the various rates of inundation that will occur as the water level rises. This scenario right here, at this point, that's about 18 million people displaced permanently. You have to find new homes for it. And already as a country, we're already jam-packed in there. You have 2,900 people per square mile already in Liberia. And you look at places in the US, you're talking 100, 150 people per square mile. 2,900, and they're going to have to move another 15, 18 million people and jam them in there with the limited resources they have. What's going to happen? Well, they'll flow out just like any other refugees anywhere else. That will disrupt India, that will disrupt other places, and you're just going to see a daisy chain. And that's all because of the climate change, the increased water flow, or increased water level. Other effects in the developing world? No, we don't see heat like this. This is the Indian heat wave in 2015. They're talking about 46 degrees Celsius. Okay, we don't think Celsius very much. That's 115 degrees. Now, people from the Southwest may say, oh, okay, 115, yeah, we can do that. I'll just tell you, in Delhi, India, it is not a dry heat. You're dealing with stuff when the humidity's up in the 90s in terms of percentiles, and it is just hot. It is just incredibly oppressive. You don't have enough air conditioning to make that better for any significant fraction of the people. I got to be at 115 degrees when I was over in Senegal. And it was before the monsoons came in, so it was still a little bit muggy, but it wasn't as muggy as it would become later. This is how hot that gets. I was laying on my back. Now, there's a, your breathing pattern, bear with me, my wife knows what's happening here, but it's just my paragraph. But your breathing pattern is that normally you'll take about 6 or so shallow breaths, and then you'll take one deep breath called the sigh respiration. That's just your standard pattern, kind of keeps up all the area in the lungs, keeps that open. So I was laying on my back, and you have this little pit right here in your chest that forms over the xiphoid process, right down below the pectoralis and kind of above the abdomen. I would sweat enough when it was that hot that the sweat would pool in that little pit, and that every time I took a sigh respiration, you'd get rivulets of sweat that would run down your side and just wake you up. That is what that kind of heat does. Things just don't work real well. People don't work real well. Economies don't function real well. People get angry really easily. This causes all sorts of problems when you get that kind of heat. And it's not just problems with heat with people, we have it with infrastructure. Here it is actually melting the asphalt. And this is again from India in 2015. So, it has a huge effect there as well. Also has an effect on health. This is the range for malaria. Now the areas that you see right here where it's in yellow, these are areas where malaria exists now. The areas in red where it will become reintroduced as the climate continues to warm. And these will always affect people, the poorest people the most. The biggest ones are going to be in children. About 1 out of 20 children in malarious areas will die of malaria before they turn 5. One of the problems with the extension, though, into new areas, well, one of the reasons why the other 19 don't die is that you get it infected with malaria and you develop some immune response. Okay, and that works fairly well. But when you extend into new areas, then all of a sudden everybody is immunologically naive. They have not had it before. So everybody in those areas will get malaria for the first time. And that creates a huge, huge toll in terms of people that die or can die of malaria. And we're really having huge problems right now with malaria with resistance. And we are running out of effective medicines to fight malaria. And just luckily for the United States, we don't have it here anymore. We used to. We used to have malaria. Actually, malaria was not eliminated in the continental United States until about 1950. It's an interesting disease. It was actually brought over as part of the Columbian Exchange. It came over with black slaves and with Southern Europeans who actually brought malaria over, and as the Western colonists and slaves moved across the country, they actually brought the malaria with them. So malaria, when people first moved in, would not have any malaria until there were enough mosquitoes got infected with the malaria to then start transmitting it to the rest of the people. So there's many examples where people would first move into an area, and then after a couple of years, everybody would get sick and die, or many people would, to the point where they would abandon settlements. And that's the kind of stuff that can happen when malaria is reintroduced into an area. Yes?
I'd like to offer a really relevant update on that. In the summer of 2012, I attended the symposium on adapting to climate change in Jefferson City, and the Missouri Department of Health was already preparing for exactly what he's talking about, because the type of mosquitoes that carry malaria are currently present now where they never have been before in the boot hill of Missouri. So folks, if you think this is just in the southern United States, it's not. It's here, and we have to take action.
Yeah.
Love what you're sharing.
Yeah, and it's actually an interesting story. A whole lecture on its own is how the United States eliminated malaria. It was not DDT. It was actually public health and improving the social situation, economic situation of the people at most risk. But that's a topic for another day.
What about the other ones, like yellow fever, dengue, or Zika, or some of those others that are transmitted similar to?
Yeah, those ones certainly will be coming up. Yeah, there's a lot of different slides you can have on the spread of the disease. They've now documented Zika being autochthonously, which is really a weird word, but means basically acquired by fresh mosquito bite. We've had it down in Florida. It's now been documented down in Texas. So Zika's coming up. We've always had some, small amounts of chikungunya in the real southern states, and it's going to, and we actually are a little bit surprised it hasn't spread much more up, further up. The mosquitoes that transmit Zika and chikungunya are actually present all the way up to Maine, and certainly they are present here in the Midwest. So yeah, we'll probably see that come up here too, but so far it's a new disease. It hasn't spread up here yet, as far as we know. Other diseases that are affected. This is Nimba County. This is where we had our Ebola treatment unit. You can see it's pretty, well, not much there besides the trees. Liberia is about the size of Kentucky, and it has about the same population. Population density about 107 people per square mile. People have been pushed by problems with the agriculture, particularly with the variability of the rain, been pushed more into the forest to get, basically to survive, so to be able to get the food. And one of the problems that occurs is that people actually don't do all that well in the jungles. Even in Africa, people don't live in the deep jungles. And what happens is that you start hunting things, for example, like fruit bats, which are really actually big, meaty kind of things. Fruit bat will carry off a mango. I mean, these are big critters. And some of the monkeys. And the problem is that those monkeys and those fruit bats actually can carry Ebola. And so during the slaughtering process, people can get exposed to the Ebola, and that starts the process of transmission, particularly when you have crowded areas, crowded populations, and then you have the epidemic like you did over in West Africa. And that results in having all the disruption that we had. Here in the United States, we had just a couple cases of Ebola, and they were all acquired outside the country, and you saw how much hysteria and everything else that caused. That is another effect, an indirect effect of the climate change that forced people into the jungles to get from where they were exposed to the Ebola. So, addressing climate change, what can we, you know, we need to do that. So a lot of good reasons to. One is, you know, the biggest reason, it's a moral imperative. You know, we are called on, you know, and whether you want to say it's a, you know, philosophical crime, you know, conditional imperative, or a, you know, in my case, you know, it's a command from the Bible to care for the least of these. You know, we are all called on to care for people who need our help. And the United States, as a country, should be demonstrating this to the rest of the world. Other benefits to the U.S. of addressing it? Yeah, you know, it's well, anything we do that addresses climate change is going to reduce problems for U.S. health, agricultural, economic effects, all that. The world economy. The world economy is going to suffer terribly under the with climate change, particularly the scenario where we continue to produce as much CO2 as we feel like we want to. And the people that are going to be hurt the most and be hurt the first are going to be those in the developing world. But by addressing that, the U.S. economy will be stronger, the world economy will be stronger. The other thing about addressing climate change for the people in the developing world is it will make things less complicated. Now, there's only a certain amount of, attention span. Not only people, but governments can generate. And if you have a lot of places that are going crazy like Syria, and you have another one in Venezuela, it's going to reduce the number of climate refugees. We will have climate refugees. And this would be, that's not really the best of all reasons to address climate change in the developing world, but it's a huge reason anyhow. You saw what happened when we had all the Haitian boat people coming in. And we had a hard time stopping them. Frankly, I ended up in Haiti because we invaded the country because we had all these these refugees, these are economic refugees coming in. When you have all the climate refugees coming in, that's going to cause a lot of problems for the U.S. And we can reduce that by addressing climate change and for the benefit of the people in the developing world. And so what can we do? Well, of course, the very first thing is reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. That benefits us, it benefits everybody. Work on mitigation. There are incredibly underfunded organizations within the UN that are designed to help developing countries with mitigation. And there's just nowhere near enough money to be able to do that. Not enough money is even, they're just terribly underfunded. There's things that the developing countries have benefits though. They have assets. One of them is just all the trees. That's a huge carbon sunk, and it's just being destroyed very rapidly. You go into Indonesia. There were days when they were burning the forests in Indonesia that Indonesia produced more greenhouse gases than the United States did. And that was all from burning the forests in Indonesia to clear the way for the palm oil plantations. General economic development. Well, that always helps things, and that particularly helps the resilience of the people. And resilience there being ability to withstand problems, it's economic, it's health, it's infrastructure, all of that. And the last thing, we can work on sustainable energy sources. There's a direct correlation between the amount of energy consumed in a society and the economic well-being, at least as expressed in GDP per capita. And that's everybody's desire, is to live a little bit higher on the socioeconomic platform. They want it, we want it, but each notch up you go requires additional energy, and coal is cheaper. And so we need to be able to help people develop sustainable, renewable energy systems that will allow them the ability to develop, but not to ruin the rest of the world for us.